Test.
Check your receiver microphones.
Check. Hey. Works. Mine works.
Justine,
Wow.
it's like, no, I feel like I have to.
I see. I spotted a few females.
Okay, I think they trust me to just get this started. Welcome to our panel where we'll be discussing creative briefs. It will undoubtedly be the most boring panel you've attended at this conference. If you care about creative briefs, that means you're super... I won't say anything because Pat loves creative briefs. Loves them. And that's probably... So just quick intro. We won't go into... You're supposed to read their bios somewhere else, but this is Pat Weaver, co-head of Warner Chappell Production Music. Ehren, Ebbage, composer, producer extraordinaire, or Kribos. Composer, producer, all-around cool dude in from Israel. I don't know exactly the city.
Yeah.
And Justine Oak, who is a artist, producer, composer, kind of does it all. And then Eddie Chavez, who is a music supervisor at NBC Universal. All right. Probably a good place to start is with a quick definition of, I don't know, we probably have all levels of people here. Do you want to, and you're probably the best person to do this, just in a short paragraph, what is a creative brief?
Test, test, test. So I just want to ask a quick question. How many people here are composers? Oh my gosh.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Good to know.
How many people are executive producers or producers? Okay. And I doubt any client types are here except on the panel. So a brief is super simple. It's a creative outline. It's actually more than just creative. It's a job description for the project. We're talking about music briefs today. Everybody probably has dealt with a brief in their career. There's good ones and really crappy ones. So the basic premise of a brief is it tells you what the project is. If it's a good brief, it'll give you an overview of the brand, if it's for a brand or a library. Then the actual, did I say deliverables, the music deliverables, the date it's due, the audio format it's due in, and how to label that. And beyond that, it just depends on how in detail you want to get about some briefs go into instrumentation and structure and a lot of other things, but that's basically it.
Thank you.
And if it's a greatest brief, it also includes the budget.
That would come from a composer. Yeah, you want to give the demo fee, and then if it goes final, what the final fee is, or if it's for a library track, what the fee is.
Perfect. Eddie, so we usually, whoever creates the brief is usually standing in between kind of the creative force requesting music and the composer who's doing it. So what kind of things do you do to kind of capture the vision of the person looking for music and get that across to the composer?
Yeah, it's a good question. You know, the position that I'm in as a music supervisor is I'm also very much a middle person where I am kind of trying to communicate the creative from someone else who may not necessarily be as music savvy or may not necessarily know music in that way, and so they're relying on us to do that. And so I'm trying to sort of extract their creative vision, distill it down to what they want, and then communicate that back to who I'm working with on the production side, which would be, you know, someone at Warner Chappell or wherever it may be. And I think for me, it's just a lot of really asking questions and oftentimes figuring out what they don't want to sort of figure out what they do want. It's definitely a back and forth, and it's a creative conversation. And I try to do a lot of sussing that out before I even create a brief that I'm then going to share with my partners.
Okay, so there's this translation aspect that kind of has to happen, where maybe a production company talks in visuals or colors or whatever, and you have to translate to music. How detailed do you get usually? Do you get into specifics like, I really want French horns and whatever, or do you keep it?
I try to keep some level of vagueness and creative interpretation there for the composer that I may be working with, or the music production agency I may be working with, because I think there's value in having different perspectives and having people sort of creatively problem solve and find their ways through something. But while, you know, for the sake of being productive, I do try to make sure that there are guardrails, and I try to be as specific and helpful as I can in my brief without dictating to them what they're going to create, you know.
So you feel like gives you better product?
I think arriving at the creative is better when you have some variety to choose from.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so there are times where those creating the briefs feel like they are communicating totally clearly what they want, what the client wants, and that is misinterpreted by the composer, or you got it wrong. Do you guys have any examples of that happening? Has it ever happened where you're like, I know exactly what the brief is asking, and it was like total opposite, incorrect, went south fast kind of a thing?
I mean, I can say that there have definitely, I mean, I've done a lot of music searches and custom jobs in my years, and there have definitely been times where the results have sort of missed the mark, either because my instructions weren't clear enough, or the person that I was sharing those instructions with maybe didn't have the depth of expertise in the space of music that I was looking for, and so they didn't really quite land what I was looking for. In a lot of those instances, I mean, I find every part of my job as a supervisor being a creative conversation, and so it is a lot of kind of going back to the source and giving feedback and giving notes and saying, okay, here's where we missed the mark. Can we try again and find something that's a little more in the lane that I need? And, you know, and reaching out to as many people as I can and casting a wide net and giving a lot of people opportunities to sort of show that they can work in the scope that we're asking them to work within.
Okay, on the composer side?
To dovetail that, specifically, was talking about Eddie was talking about custom music. I think it's more relevant where, you know, misinterpretation, or it's like it occurs more when you're doing custom music. Because of the factor that you're short on time, so, you know, it's like you only have a short window to like get it right. And if you don't interpret the brief well, it's like, oh well, you know, it's like maybe the competition or, you know, another composer got the gig. So I feel like in custom music that happens more often, where misinterpretation versus, you know, let's say if we produce music for the catalogs, there's just a little bit more time frame to hone on it, and there is less on stakes, you know, than like a custom gig. We have done together a custom job for one of, would you call it Warner's subsidiaries, or Warner, like another arm of Warner? It's called Warner Music Entertainment, right? So Pat and Scott reached out to me and my team. By the way, they're sitting here, those beautiful guys. And they wanted us to pitch a number of short examples of logo music that you wanted to create for that production company. So that those bumpers that they put in front of, let's say, a movie or a TV show, it's like, that represents kind of like the 20th Century Fox or, that Lionsgate logo bumper. So from what I remember, the two key elements or the two keywords that were part of the brief was we wanted to sound like it has legacy. Like, what is legacy sonic-wise? It can be a lot of things, and how do we interpret that? And then they wanted it to feel modern and, kind of forward-thinking, because this is the kind of company that is going to do productions for documentaries, paying homage to, the Warner legacy artists and all that. So we had to keep that in mind. And we had a short amount of time, even though we submitted 14 demos, which is quite over-ambitious. But in truth, we were able to produce maybe 4 or 5 of them, like fully produced. And then I had a work in progress. And I felt like I would just send it out, there's no risk in sending out even like, work that maybe it's not fully produced. Sometimes it can look bad, but in that specific situation, I thought, I'll just include the work in progress. And I felt like we felt really strong that the 4 demos that we fully produced and with orchestra and, electronics, and it really like was part of the, of what the brief, wanted to convey and wanted to evoke sonically. But after discussions with the suits and the execs, the most surprising track that was really buried, between all those, unproduced songs, straight out of Sibelius, if you know the notation software. So it sounded really crappy. And they ended up picking that because for some reason the theme resonated with, with everyone at the board more than any of the really fully produced tracks. So that was a surprise, and it was a fun project, and we ended up recording it live. 9 seconds of music in Budapest? In Budapest, yeah. And I remember when Scott and I were on the live, in the Zoom sessions with the with the studio manager, and he said that it was like the best 9 seconds he ever heard in his life. It was a kind of a...
I didn't tell him they say that to everyone, but okay.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I want to add something to that story that Orr doesn't even know about. So before Orr got the very descriptive brief, the executive told me, yeah, we need a movie logo and like 20th Century Fox. And I said, oh, okay, just like 20th Century Fox? And he's like, yeah, we want it to sound important. And we want people to get excited when they hear it. And I said, okay, but that's very like fanfare-ish. It's very traditional. Why don't we send you a bunch of different logos from all over the place and get your feedback on those? So in other words, when you have a client that's either they're vague and they don't really know what they want, or you can tell what they want is not what they want. We send them, before I make the composer jump through hoops, we send them reference tracks. And so from that list of very different types of tags, from, the whole brass da-da-da-da-da-da to electronic and modern, and we got them to choose a direction and really think about what do you want to convey, and then that's what you got.
Yeah, that's a pretty important part of the process, hashing it out before you even approach the composer to like kind of dial in your creative brief. You made them narrow it down more to a direction that was like easier to capture. Ehren, I've sent you plenty of creative briefs and we've worked together a lot over the years. When you get a brief and it has a lot of this language like important or percolating or epic, how do you take this stuff and interpret it and turn it into music? Like, what do you key in on to try to make sure you're giving back the right music?
Well, excuse me. Yeah, everything I do is important, Scott.
That's a different kind of important. It
Really,
sounds
what we're
important.
doing with music is providing the emotional tone of whatever it's being paired with. We're supporting the emotional tone, and so for me, that's the first question: is, do I understand the emotion that we're trying to convey? And you know, depending on who is sending the brief, sometimes the language is really flowery and descriptive and sort of, you can tell it's intended to be inspiring, but doesn't actually have much to latch onto. Other briefs are really dry and straightforward, and so you know, it's really like being presented with a puzzle. And some of the pieces are already in place. Every brief is a different puzzle, and for each one, you have to figure out which pieces you have and which pieces you need, and so. You know, sometimes it's, you know, the scene is the main character walks into a hotel lobby and there needs to be lounge piano. And in a case like that, the whole puzzle is complete. Yeah. You understand what it is. There's no real question. You might talk about tempo or something like that. Other briefs are not helpful in any, you know, it's like, this must span all generations, and this must appeal to people who lived in the 20s and people who are going to live in 100 years, you know, and absolutely impossible to interpret. And so those briefs have no puzzle pieces arranged, and so you just have to start asking questions, and for me, it always, first question is always, what is the emotional tone?
Yeah, that's great.
And then you start answering questions that follow that.
Yeah, so Justine, what do you do when you get a brief that has seemingly contradictory instructions? Like, I remember getting one once from Germany. They loved techno and they loved polka. And if you think about it, those go together very, very well. But in practice, you know, it's a little iffy. So it's like, how, if you get something that's like, well, you're asking for this, but also that, and that doesn't seem to gel, I mean, how do you hash that out?
The best thing to do is always keep the objective in mind. So is it a brand? Is it a show? Is it a game? And what are they trying to do? As he was saying, what is the emotion that they're trying to evoke? How is this supporting the visual, which would be probably the most important? How can I better serve what's there? So if there is a contradiction that they're wanting, sometimes it's understanding what they're trying to achieve with that contradiction. Oh, we want something like this, but with a different twist. Well, why do you want it to be different? Oh, because we want to appeal, we have a traditional brand, but we want to appeal to a slightly younger audience, or this audience with this. So it's kind of trying to look at it from a business point. Okay, this is the objective and the goal that they're trying to reach. How do I fit into their picture, and how can I best serve that creatively?
And are you doing this on your own, or does this involve communication with whoever's giving you the creative brief?
It depends. I think in a creative setting, more communication is definitely the best way to go. But a lot of times, because of time restraints and things like that, you know, I think over time you develop a little bit of a sixth sense on, you know, for a lot of what people are looking for, because of what's in the landscape, what has worked well before, and what is being used, and how we can make it different if they're wanting to do more of a unique take on it.
Yeah, thank you.
Can I add something to that?
Okay.
Okay, so we had a brief come in recently, and it was a pitch. So there was no creative communication with us and the client. It was just their brief and their music reference, and they wanted us to send examples. So the brief, which was very pretty and well laid out, and it was a deck, said they want high-energy dance pop. And the whole premise was the main character was going to be dancing through all these scenarios. But the reference track was kind of mid-tempo, wistful indie music. And
Indie folk pop, right?
Yeah, it just didn't, it wasn't high energy dance pop at all. So we were like, well, what are they doing here? And so as I was starting to put some examples together, I thought, what do they like about this track? Because clearly it's not what they're asking for in the brief. Well, the chorus refrain was living in the now, which was perfect for their brand. So this happens quite a bit, where the client will send a reference track that has nothing to do with the music. It's something in the lyric that they're gravitating towards. And if you don't get to have that creative call with them, you have to figure that out on your own. So we sent a bunch of high energy dance pop, and we threw in some, whatever you called it. But we don't know if that's a success story yet because we're waiting to hear back.
Yeah, it's one of the more difficult creative briefs I've ever seen, and part of the issue was its wordiness. Like they kind of they were coming from so many directions couldn't narrow it down. It was pretty rough. But you have a good point and a good segue. Eddie, music references are a pretty typical part of creative briefs. Let's talk about the pros and cons, because sometimes it makes for a slam dunk and other times it causes huge headaches.
Yeah, you can definitely go in different directions when you're using music references, or if I'm working with producers or executives on the studio side that have specific music references that they want me to use in the searches or the custom music that I'm having commissioned. On the positive side, I mean, the really obvious positives are that it gives you guardrails and it sort of gives you a foundation and a framework of what sound they're looking for, and having those firm references really kind of lets you know, okay, they have Billie Eilish song reference here, and they have this other artist, and they have this other artist here, so I can kind of suss out a pretty firm creative direction from those references. But there are times where creative references can either be too much if there are too many of them, or if they really want us to rely on those references to get very close to the sound, because then we start playing in the land where we get close to either infringing, or it's maybe not a straight infringement, but it's such a close sound alike that it would be an issue, or it would be problematic with some of the reference artists. And so that's where it can kind of go off the rails and sort of become a bad thing when you have too many existing references.
Yeah, I mean, I think everyone's faced that. Yeah,
I want to add to the idea of references. Sometimes what you get from references is what, if the references are exciting, so the person on the other side is kind of trying to convey through the references, is not necessarily to, maybe take the musical elements that are evident in those references and maybe model, the new pieces after those elements, or use them as kind of, anchors to base your, the music or the new piece that you're creating. But what they want to be is get excited. So, for example, with video game companies, and when they send briefs, they don't necessarily like send you references, especially if they send references from like the top 40, It's like, well, we're not gonna give you a top 40 unless you're gonna bring in top 40 artists, right? But what they wanna be like super excited about the track. So if you're doing something that, even if it's a departure from the references, like taking the gamble, that and with the confidence that you're going to create something like this super exciting, that's still something that is valid. And I've seen this in different pitches that we have done, that if you send out something that, and it's also, you have to understand the profile of the client or the company you work with. If you understand like their taste, so references are, can be a starting point, but if you understand the profile and the taste, like you just want to excite someone with the track that you're, providing, and it doesn't have to be. I mean, the point I'm getting to is like it doesn't have to be, close to the reference. It can actually be a departure.
Right. A pretty common issue I see with references comes from especially young producers who they aspire to be doing something. So it's like they want to be producing maybe a ad for Apple, and they send those kind of references over where it's like, this track could only get used in an Apple spot. It's that cool, that unique, but it's like their commercials for like erectile dysfunction pills, and they're like, it doesn't work, you know what I mean? It's just like total opposite, but you get that they wanted to be as creative as possible.
Yeah.
But then, like, do you outright ignore? We've seen these. It's like, do you ignore the reference, or do you pass it along and knowing that it's like not going to hit the mark because inevitably you get the correct music for the commercial. That's what they had to choose because the client came in and chose the right music, not the one that the director thought they wanted.
So a good approach that's worked for us is we cover what they're asking for, like the Apple Music, and then we do what we think will work, and then sometimes we'll do a wild card, just something nobody thought of, and more often than you'd imagine, the wild card is chosen. So yeah, if somebody's too off the mark, you have to cover both that base and what you really think they need.
And so on the composer and Ehren, how do you feel about wild cards? If you get asked to do the wild card, which is like, you know, the ugly stepchild of the project, and just like a hope and a prayer that it'll get picked, but you're the wild card guy, what do you think about that?
That's a good question. I'm not sure that I'm the wild card guy very often.
Okay. Have any of you been the wild card person?
Yeah, I've definitely, I mean, I agree with the approach that you just described in terms of whether I'm going the custom route and having something really created to brief, or whether I'm pulling pre-existing stuff for a brief. I often, if I feel like there's not a clear communication of what my executive wants, I will give them what they think they want, what I think they want, and then something that's a little more out of left field that still lives in the general space that I think they want it to. Because I think it helps to see the things that don't work against the things that do work, even if that executive thinks their idea is what's going to work. So.
Yeah.
What we did in a recent project, because I know how, I'm not surprised at all by your hesitation, because if you're the wild card guy, you're like, well, I have the least chance of winning this job. So what we did was every composer that was on the project, we said, follow the brief and do a wild card.
Yeah, which is fair.
And clients are, so far, we're waiting for the outcome. They're loving the wild card stuff.
Yeah.
So that seemed like it was easier to swallow.
Yeah.
We made it part of like a protocol, because we realized, especially if you're working with creatives who don't speak the creative language or the jargon of music, what I found is that they would be better off comparing one to another. Like Eddie said, you know, it's like, oh, I don't like this, but I like this. But if they only have one thing to compare, like if they only have one reference point, it's hard for them to, like, you know, imagine, maybe this is kind of, we haven't really, so it's, for them it would be hard to articulate, but it would be easier to articulate if they have two choices. So I think that's why, you know, we came like, you know, guns blazing, 14 demos for that gig, you know, it's like, whoa.
And half of them were really half-assed, or?
That's how we do, you know? You never know. That's the wild card. I wanted to say, by the way, about the wild card, I don't think we've been a wild card, you know, like a quote-unquote, you know, kind of, you know, a go-to, but we've been a safe...
Maybe nobody tells you guys you're doing the wild card.
It's possible.
Yeah.
I mean, we do
Yeah.
that. There is a wild card choice that we have people, like we
Yeah.
just did that recently with another composer, where we knew they were sort of the, what if we did this thing? And it's like,
Yeah.
but they don't know that wasn't first choice, but...
We've been a
Don't-
save
don't
my
give away too
ass.
much.
They're not here,
We've been a
so.
save my ass kind of guy once. It's like, we have this spot, the composers or the music production we work with, we can't get it right, you know, can you save my ass, you know, like we need to get it done. And again, for that gig specifically, we sent 3 demos for them to choose from. And it was for a big partnership commercial, and it worked out. They chose 1 out of 3. And we saw that, you know, throughout our careers, that it's better to send more options than just send 1.
You never send one. Unless you've been working, there's very few instances, like we have a project right now. We sent one because we've spent so much time with this client. We felt, and the budget was, so we felt, okay, you're going to get one really good one based on all these back and forth conversations we've had going on months. We're still waiting to hear about that one. We had another client, he owned the company, and we sent him 2 demos, and he just emailed us back, number 1.
That was it.
That's it. It's another one or
Wrap
the
it
other.
up.
Great.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's like, okay.
that was it. Sorry, Ehren, would you have something?
I was thinking about an earlier question about when the whole thing goes off the rails. And I think the times that's happened to me is when I tried to be the wild card. And the, like pharmaceutical ads, the first time I was asked to do one of those, I had the brilliant idea of trying to make it cool. Like, I'm going to be the first one to make a cool farm.
You're the guy.
And there is nothing cool about it. It just does not work. And that was actually a really great lesson. Like, we're doing this job, we're sort of combining flavors, and some flavors just do not go together. Some flavors are, the wild card flavor, like whatever, chilies and chocolate. It's like, oh, that's actually, I would not have thought of that, and that's really good. But sometimes it's, something really disgusting, and that's what I learned by trying to be cool with my pharmaceutical pitch.
Don't do it ever again.
People make fun of pharmaceutical ads, but they are tricky. They are so nuanced, and they're one of the most nuanced style of commercial there is if they're done well. And you've got to contend with sometimes that disqualifying information, and it's all soothing voices, and the music is supposed to be comforting, but sometimes it still needs to be current. If you go too heartfelt, that's old school and sappy. So it is extremely nuanced, and the pharmaceutical clients we work with are very picky. They hear things I don't even hear. So
Yeah, but there
it's
are
tricky.
guys that consistently get it right based on the brief, and that goes for not just pharmaceuticals, but there are just some guys who can take the brief and win the job a lot more than other people, and sometimes it's because they just they get it just right. I don't know what it is, but they really lock in to whatever the vision is. Justine, if a brief comes to you and it is detailed, they tell you exactly what they want, they've got refs, how do you feel about that versus something that gives you way more creative freedom? If this is say you're pitching, if you're doing the bake-off and trying to win a job.
Okay, we love that. So the way that I like to think about a brief is essentially it's information. So the more information you can have, that can empower you to provide what they're looking for. So there's all sorts of information that you can get from a brief. The tone of what they want, the emotion. You can have references that sonically give you information about these kind of instruments, this kind of tempo, this kind of energy, just all sorts of information. And then there's the language aspect, right? So it's like, we're looking for something powerful, but that means something different to a lot of people. We're looking for something modern. We're looking for something edgy. To one person, edgy could be like, but like to another person, it's like really out there electronic music. So it's really important for you, before you spend all the time to create everything, to understand the landscape of information, and kind of sometimes the best thing to do is ignore parts of the brief, because based on your gut, you know that what they're saying here is actually not what you think they're looking for. Now, if you can confirm that with the source, that is the best, and you also have to kind of think about, what is this for? So is it for a scene in a restaurant where people are having an emotional discussion and it's something in the back, you don't want it to be too distracting? Or is it to highlight a product and make you like want to buy it? Or there's so many factors that you kind of have to think about who the client is. And another good thing to think about is, what is their history of music that they've used before? So if you know that they tend to lean this way sonically because that's what their brand is about, then you have to also research that and survey that and kind of know, okay, this is what they've done. This might be a cool new twist for them. And so you compile all of that information, try to weed through it, and what Pat was saying, try to understand what they're saying when it's not what they actually mean, and then take all of that. That's the business side. So you take all of this information, okay, filter, filter, filter. I think I know what's going on. If I can confirm it, even better. And then you take it to the creative side. Okay, this is what I'm trying to do. What would be a really cool way to do that? What would be a really musical way to do that? What would be a really engaging way to do that? And maybe the best thing to do is not to do so much, because you don't want to overstep on what they're trying to do if they're doing an emotional scene, or you just want to heighten whatever they're doing to best do that. And then I think over time you can just kind of navigate that with a gut instinct the more you do it, right?
Yeah, excellent answer. You're pretty smart. We should work together sometime.
I want to add to the very well said, Justine. You mentioned something about the understanding the profile of the people behind the brief, and I think it's really important because you see it often, especially in trailers. You work with with people who would articulate, we want the next big thing. What is the next big thing?
What is the next big thing?
It is the same old thing.
It's the same as the other.
But Justine articulated it the best because, yes, they want something new, but you have to understand the profile and the history of the people who create, the entire project. I understand what is the profile of their partners, what is the profile of their this new project that they're working on. And research, the history of the music that they're doing, because otherwise, then you end up, with a really wild card, and it's completely off. It's like, no, we don't want that. We actually meant, something else. Well, send me what you meant, and then it's like the same old reference. It's like something that sounds. Well, why didn't you say it from the beginning?
Yeah. So you guys it sounds like you let past projects they've done inform.
Yes, definitely.
Like what you're doing currently.
But that can also go either way. So if they're wanting to twist and go a different way, sometimes they want to keep doing what's working, but sometimes they want to have a fresh take on that. And that's how you know how to gauge it from the information. Do the reference sound like what they were doing? And it's also, I think, good to not go too crazy. If you have to choose between being a little bit on the safe side and going too crazy, probably, on the safe side and make it sound really good, because the wild card may not stick. It's awesome when it does, but it may not, so.
Yeah. Eddie, when I was a composer, my ego told me lots. It made all my decisions for me back then. Still probably does. But it would tell me, if I could just speak to the client directly and get rid of the Eddies and the Pats of the world, then I could do this so much better. If I just talk to them, then I wouldn't get this filter. Everything that's coming through them is obviously skewed. They don't know what they're talking about. I'm going to give you the chance to defend your position. What is your role? How do you see yourself as this executive producer, music supervisor between the client and the composer? What are you doing? Are you policing? Are you interpreting?
It's, it checks a lot of boxes. I think the importance of being this middle person between my executive that I'm working with, who may not be a music creative, and the composers that I might be commissioning, is that I think, for one, we act as a filter and sort of a translation tool. We take production speak and marketing speak and, things that they describe to me, around the marketing campaign and how they want to launch this show or this product, or how they want this scene to feel, or how they want this cover version of this song to feel. And I take that and sort of put that into musical terms, right? In terms of, we want stylistically this, we want the tempo to be this, we want energy and mood to be this here and this there and not that here. We need a break in this point, we need edit points. Just really trying to kind of lay out a map for my creative partners to sort of navigate that to try to get to the end. Because as much as you think it would be easier to talk directly to the production executives, it's probably a lot harder. It's probably a lot more confusing to try to suss out what they're trying to tell you without having someone sort of able to filter what the production speak is and turn it into music speak.
Yeah, I find a lot of times they need you to help them
Yes.
find what they're looking for. They're like, I don't really know. You're the music guys. Why don't you figure it out?
There is a lot of creative conversation going on between my executive and myself before I even start thinking about who I'm gonna reach out to get this thing done. There's a lot that I want to have figured out and that I want them to have figured out. And there's a lot creatively that I want them to be comfortable with before I even start having the conversations. And then we can kind of go down that path. When we can get submissions, we can submit notes. We can say, hey, this is too safe. Get a little crazier, get a little more creative or something like that.
Yeah.
Also, especially with advertising, they don't like to, once you're past the creative stage and you've submitted demos, they are really reluctant to critique a composer to their face. I've had clients that said, oh, let me get the composer. No, we just want to talk to you. So you are really the go-between throughout the whole entire project. And I call it my client head, you know, where I'm interpreting what the clients, all the messy stuff they're saying, and I'm not a composer, so, but I do have that ability to kind of take that and interpret it enough into musical language that the composer understands it. Sometimes a composer, because they're in their own worlds 90% of the time, I'm looking at Sean, they'll sit in a creative call, the same call you're in, you'll hear the same information, and then you hang up, and you're thinking, okay, we need this with this instrumentation. But the composer's thinking, you know what? I just bought that new euphonium. And this would be a great opportunity to use that euphonium. And so he's listening to the entire call thinking, yeah, euphonium. So you have to protect the composers from sabotaging themselves sometimes.
It's so accurate. Yeah. So beyond creating the creative brief, one of the most important jobs you guys do is picking composers, and I'm sure all the composers here want to know, how do you decide who gets the call on any given job? You know, it's like you have a pool of 200 composers out there that you know, all talented. How come those three got the call and that person didn't?
You become a stalker.
You what?
You become a stalker.
A stalker?
Yeah, no. You stalk Scott.
That's not funny. I've had a composer stalker. For real.
That's a different panel. We'll stick to the question at hand for now.
Oh, you're looking at me, so...
Unless you pick stalkers, then go ahead and...
No, I didn't pick him. So you get to know, you know, I'm sure composers, this is a really frustrating thing that happens in our business. They get pigeonholed. And there's a reason they get pigeonholed, because they do that, they do it expertly. It's going to be easy for me. They're just going to get it right away. So in the jobs we're doing for advertisers or a client versus a library project, it's really important you pick the right composer or team of composers that you know they will understand the brief, they'll get the nuances, they're good at humor, you know what. Whereas in a library setting, we work with composers a little differently than a lot of places. We have the creative conversation first before we do the brief. So we have an idea, we talk to the composer. I like to push boundaries or have the composer push their own boundaries. You can take more risks. You can let the composer put a little more of himself into the vision right from the get-go, and then you create the brief that is basically a summary of that conversation, and away you go. But when you're in a fast turnaround, you've got to client that's difficult. You've got picture. Not every composer's good writing to picture or to storyboards or to a script. That comes with a lot of experience in that world. So that is a lot to do with determining who I might suggest for a project.
Excellent. Eddie?
Yeah, I think for me, it's kind of similar. I mean, depending on the project and the scope of the project and how I'm going about, executing the music, oftentimes I'm leaning on production houses and places like Chappell and sort of going to places that I've either worked with before or I know based on their, portfolio that they can do something that I'm looking to get done, and then relying on those places to be the experts in curating which composer or composers can get this done to the best of their ability. And if I am in the direct conversation with hiring a composer, then it often comes down to familiarity or shorthand. Is this someone that I know can do this based on what we've done in the past, or is this someone who was recommended to me from someone that I can trust, that I know can handle this? And then oftentimes, I mean, when all things are equal, it comes down to availability, who can get this done within the deadline. If I'm working on something that's short form, like a marketing piece, if it's a conversation around a composer getting hired onto a show, then that's, availability becomes a bit more of a part of the conversation, because that's a longer commitment with more music to be committed and just being much more attached to a longer form project.
Yeah, just a suggestion for composers. Don't ever phone it in. If you are jamming and you get the call and that person's begging, can you just please do this? Can you squeeze it in? Just don't do it. I mean, it only takes one time. We know when you're phoning it in. It just takes once, and then we're not going to call on you anymore. So that also goes a long way. You want to know the person's invested, they're excited, they're happy to have the project, they're paying attention. So do yourselves a favor and just let that one go.
Ehren, we've all, as composers, gotten feedback that, was negative on something you've submitted. How do you deal? How does one deal with this negative feedback from the client, especially when it involves something that you have put a heart and soul into, and is totally, completely true to your artistic self? I mean, how do you deal with that when it doesn't align with the creative brief or what the client needs?
I approach this work in general from a perspective of a service provider. If I want to create my own just artistically pure work, I'll just do that and put it on Spotify or whatever, and that's the avenue for that. This line of work, the job I'm being asked to do, is to help fulfill somebody else's vision, help contribute to somebody else's vision. And it can be so frustrating to get attached and excited to something that I thought of, but the most exciting part of this whole process for me is the collaborative effort, and to feel like the thing is working. And if it's not working, I'm trying to think of specific examples. I love snare drums, and projects that I've worked on with Pat's like, well, you can use a snare drum, but just turn it down so I can't hear it.
Yeah,
it's fine.
Right. You're not alone.
And, and there are moments like that where my personal taste or preference is not quite aligned with the goal of the project. But ultimately, I deal with it just by reminding myself what my job is, and that usually, sometimes it takes me, if it's something I'm really attached to, it might take me some time to get to that place.
It's hard to not have it sting.
Yeah.
But to be a pro means you just take your licking and move on, right?
Yeah. I like to think that I'm interested in great ideas, and I like to think that great ideas are self-evident, and that you know it, like when you hear it, it's just undeniably good, and it works. And that's not always the case, of course, but if something I tried isn't working, then if I'm really in the right headspace, that I get excited about finding the thing that is going to work. It's just back to the puzzle,
Yeah, that's different for me because I'm like, the client's wrong. And I totally did the right music. They don't know what they're talking about, but that's the way it is.
That's why I don't hire Scott.
That's right. There's still some ego. I said it was gone, but I lied. Or tell me about, because you have presented projects, and I've been blunt at times in my rejection of said projects.
At times.
And this, yeah. But I mean, you deal with them in a nice way, but this just happens, creative brief or not. I'll give somebody a creative brief even for a library project.
Definitely.
And it totally misses the mark. And so I've got to go back and say, I'm sorry, this isn't what I asked for. I know you're 4 or 5 songs deep, but maybe you should have, collaborated a little sooner. So talk about that. Like, how do you get buy-off sooner rather than going too far down the wrong path with a creative brief?
I think I'll dovetail what Ehren said. At the end of the day, if you look at it as a collaboration, and obviously, and I spoke about it with Eddie just before we were at the green room, you have to understand the incentives. The incentive is, well, yes, creatively. I mean, you want to be creatively busy, right? Because that's, the path you chose. But, there is also a financial aspect of it. And you have to keep it in your mind because you're committed to, like Ehren said, you're providing a service. There is definitely an exchange, and it becomes a driver. So, well, I'm getting paid to do music. I'm getting hired. Well, I'm going to be a collaborator because you hired me to do so. I don't think there is any room for a business, oh, no, I know better than you. It's like definitely there's room for the nuance of negotiating how to push the creative limits. There's always a room for that discussion. But at the end of the day, it's a collaboration. There's a funny story. I don't think we spoke about it recently, but there was one album that I pitched to you 3 times, and you said no. But you decided to take it the 4th time.
After revisions.
After revisions, yes.
Oh, good to know.
Yeah.
Just keep sending the
Good
same one
to know.
over and over and over again.
Keep that in mind.
After revisions. But yes, I think it's also, Scott, you're talking about something that it's important to know that it's relationship and understanding, your way of giving feedback, it's not something necessarily personal. You know what I mean? It's you have to understand that, yes, maybe feedback, like you said, it's it can sting, or, you spend all this time, doing something. But you need to understand, specifically, working with Scott, he has this keen ear for, edgy stuff. And, I know that when I present stuff to him, they better be well produced and not half-assed, because he will notice it. So, I have to be prepared because I understand now, after many years working together, how you listen to things. So I think that also informs, the relationship, the, understanding how you, what's your mindset when you listen to stuff, what gets you excited, how far should I go when I'm presenting stuff?
Yeah, well, there's a level of trust that comes with working together, for a while, where you can be more honest with the feedback. Justine, I want to open up to questions here in a minute, but I want to ask one last question for you. As a woman composer, which is a rare thing in this industry, what do you feel you bring that's unique, you know, when receiving creative briefs, or if you're getting the call for a job, do you feel like there's any expectation that's different of you, or do you feel like you bring a new kind of approach to the music making that, you know, a client might not otherwise get?
I'd say, you know, some things that might help, it depends on what it is, but when it comes to maybe brands or maybe products, the majority of the people purchasing those things are women. So if I like it as a consumer, and if this makes me happy and makes me want to buy the product more, I have a gut kind of like, you know, hey, this is what most women tend to like, and if that makes that part of me happy, I'm like, okay, I think this is a good track. So I've noticed that sometimes, you know, if you're a man, you might not be fine-tuned into that. Like products I will like or music I will like, it seems to generally, that seems to go up the charts. You know, I have kind of like a connection to that. So as far as, does that give an advantage? I think not any way that I personally have experienced, other than maybe those things. I can kind of foresee, I can be an early trend adopter. So I can see what people are liking and what direction it's going, and what friends or other women are liking, and kind of incorporate that within, maybe faster than a male composer.
They're
It's
definitely
because
better
you
at
shop a
multitasking.
lot, right?
Probably.
They're better at multitasking, that's for sure.
It is very different working with, you know, Justine and her crew than working with others. It's just...
Please elaborate.
well-
Have you noticed anything different working with females? And
I would just say I like it, but I would say that the majority of clients we work with seem to be women, and they communicate differently with Pat than they would with me. It's a thing. I'm not saying it's like better or worse, but there is some level of communication that tends to work better sometimes, which, you know, I don't know that I could elaborate on it. It's just like, well, I see Pat do things, and I'm like, I probably wouldn't have seen that or wouldn't have interpreted that. And I don't know if it's necessarily a woman thing or just, you know, experience, but...
When I was, just to add to that, when I was working more on the label side, it was a very, very male-dominated environment. So it was always kind of males trying to interpret what, you know, we might like or something like that in that way. But one thing that's really nice is there's a lot of women music supervisors, and there's a lot more women and in marketing and clients and things like that. So there is a lot more of that, which makes it easier in a way to navigate and communicate and understand in that way specifically.
Also, I've noticed with a lot of advertiser projects, there's many people on those calls. And the creatives tend to be men, and one guy will say one thing, and then the next guy will step on top of him and with something else, and they're very hyper, they're very excited about their project, very passionate, they're saying a lot of things. And then there's a woman whose role, don't always know what her title is, but she kind of cements
mom,
all
project mom.
Yeah, project mom, kind of cements all the comments and into something that's a little more coherent. And then I feel like I'm doing that for my team. I'm kind of guiding the questions and asking, you know, the thing about a creative call, you want the client to do most of the talking. You want as much information as you can. And that gives you, then you can ask better questions. You know, you let them describe the project from the top down, like, our company's this kind of company, and these are our values, and this particular brand, this is our history with it, and this is what we want to do, and here's our demographic, and here's just as much as you can get. We're going to have a female voiceover. We're going to, and then you bring in, well, they're guys. All the composers on our team are guys, and they start asking more creative questions. But it seems to me the women are kind of keeping it all going down a productive path, more often than not.
Yeah, I've seen it play out kind of over and over. So it's just an interesting thing to think about, I guess. But we we have maybe just a couple minutes for questions. I apologize for not leaving more time. There's somebody with a mic.
Thank you, everyone. This has been a fantastic panel. My name's Steve Bone. This is kind of for everyone. I feel like it's been touched on by most of the things you're talking about. I heard trusting your gut, and I recently got a brief that was a theme song for something. I got a lot of information from the call. Right after the call, I wrote something, like sketched something out. I felt really good about it, but I also felt like I should send options. So they went with the first thing. They loved that, but I also felt like I couldn't send one really good thing that I produced really well and then like 2 or 3 crappy options that weren't really realized. So I'm just curious how you balance that. Like, I have to do a bunch of extra work when I really feel good about this thing. I know that the other things they described, that's not really what they want. That's not going to work. But I still have to make those ideas good enough that they hold up to the thing I know they want, so they can recognize they don't want it, but also know I didn't phone it in on those things. Does that make sense?
It does. I mean, on our side, and we don't always let composers know this, but we're sort of judge and jury before passing it along. So if we don't feel it's up to snuff, we don't pass it along. So it's like even if you've sent in 3 demos, but 2 are like, we shouldn't send this because it, will cast a bad light, we just don't send them, and that's pretty common. So everything you turn in should be excellent,
ready to be hit
and
play.
I can't say that that's universal for
Sure.
everybody you're working with, but for us, it's like we have a reputation and
Yeah.
we have to stick with it.
It's hard for clients to extrapolate on a work in progress, or
Yeah.
nowadays they just want to hear what it's going to sound like, and right off the bat, even if you know you're going to overdub whatever goes final, it has to sound pretty damn good.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Maybe one or 2 questions.
Hey, great panel. I have a question for Or. I just wanted to know. Don't laugh. I love you, bro. You are part of an amazing group of composers. You guys are all great composers, sound designers, mixers. I was just curious, how do you guys collaborate, for example, when you get a brief? Do you each one do a version? How do you guys kind of delegate the tasks?
That's a very good question. Thank you. I think it's a benefit to actually, I'm a great believer in working in a team. It's kind of like taking the structure of the company you work with and implementing it, kind of like having this panel of creatives and then not trying to dissect the brief by yourself. So then the pitfall for that is the having, for my group is that we have 4 chefs in the kitchen, and that can get heated. But if we have different directions, then we are basically taking the initiative to start something, and then we present it back. Like, we get together, we go to our studios doing it, individually. We bring it together, and then we assess it, and we talk about it. There's a lot of like trying to crack the code, but you don't doing it by yourself. Like, let's say, internally with yourself, and then with the computer and the feedback, and then sending it off to the client. So we are filtering it before we even sending it to, let's say, Warner. So it goes through the, a stage of just, much more oversight, and it's a privilege to work in a team. And it can get tough. There's definitely, strong, with people with strong opinions, and, it can get challenging, but we make it work, yeah. Otherwise, we just beat one another, and that's it, Let's go outside, and that's it. Hash it out.
Okay. When should we end? Do you know? I mean, it's past the time, but I want to make sure that we're
Super short.
Going.
Thank you so much.
Okay, one more question.
I'll be super short. When do you get annoyed with too many questions from the composers?
That's a good one.
That's a good one for Pat, for sure.
Okay,
I don't
that's fair
think
enough.
I would say I've never seen it happen. I mean, get annoyed.
I'll tell you when it's annoying is when it's about the contract. or about the deal. Because we do a pretty fair deal, and it is what it is, and we do a ton of music, and we don't have time to negotiate each and everything we do. It kind of is what it is. So on a creative level, I don't get frustrated. If you're wondering, I don't want you to just go down a path if you're really confused. Let's talk, and I encourage composers working with me to call. This is a phone call. We need to have a phone call. But yeah, there's a few composers that don't get the industry and how it works, and have lawyers and managers, and that drives me crazy.
Eddie, we're sometimes hesitant to reach out. Like our sales guys don't love asking you questions. And I don't know why, but it's like we have questions about a brief, and we're like, well, what about this? And they're like, So, I mean, how do you feel about it?
I have no problems with questions with my briefs. I often will end any of my briefs that I send to anyone. I usually will tag with like, thank you, please let me know if you need any additional information to make this more clear. I would rather that we get all the information sort of sorted out on the front end so that when something gets pitched to me, it's as refined as it can be. Because often I'll get notes and we'll go another round of pitches. But the further we are from landing at the creative at the start of it, the longer it takes to get there. And we're often working under deadline. And sometimes the thing that wins a project for a song is just getting there on time, like hitting the notes and getting there before everyone else could so that we can deliver. So I definitely encourage having questions for my briefs. If it's not clear, let me know. If you need more clarity on something, let me know. I'm totally okay with it.
Okay, so keep asking, not annoying. That's the answer.
And
that's it. Thank you guys so much for attending.
Thank you.